I was always under this feeling of, I don't think this is real and I just need to figure out why. Like there's not a real, like actually long-term business here. We're just gonna get far, far, far somewhere and then we're gonna just hit a hard wall. What I was really trying to prove to myself was like this idea that something universal that could actually go cross-platform, that's just a farce. Like it doesn't exist. Because like a lot of identity prior to this is very verticalized. I don't know. I just didn't want to like spend like 4 years on this, realize that there was like a dead end of a company and then like have to go tell all these people, I'm sorry, I was wrong.
For today's episode, I'm excited to sit down with Rick Song, the co-founder and CEO of Persona, an identity verification platform that just announced a $200 million Series D. In today's interview, we turn the clock back to 2018, when Rick was an engineer at Square and very reluctant to become a founder. We then trace Rick's exact next moves, from landing on the idea, getting Persona's first 10 customers, and going horizontal quite early instead of a narrow ICP. Let's dive in.
Before you wrote the first line of code for Persona, what was going on the year before?
Working on Square Capital at that time. Square Capital was kind of expanding into a multi-product kind of category. I was working primarily on risk. So Audrey Kim was my product counterpart at that time. So I'd work closely with her, doing a lot of things around kind of building identity, fraud, risk products, and also generalizing that across like all of the work at Square. So it was a mix of the same thing. I'd been on Capital at that point and also working on around like fraud and identity stuff for 4 years. It was an extension of that, but Capital was growing like a weed at that time. So I spanned out, worked on some other products. I did a brief kind of like trip to New York at that time, meeting some of the folks over out there. But at the very end of it all, actually, there wasn't any like, spark before kind of like, that led to Persona. Charles, who's my co-founder and my roommate for up at that time, maybe 3-4 years, he'd been wanting to do a startup for a long time. A joke I always told folks is that Dropbox hadn't IPO'd them. So he didn't know the travesty that like the startup journey never ends. But Square had already IPO'd. I'd already gone through like the trough of disillusionment and understanding that every startup is a success until it's just a failure or something in the public market's eyes. And then maybe you'll correct the narrative. I think Square kind of did, but it's kind of like that. So Charles was really pushing on this idea of we should do a startup together. He had the YC DNA in him too with the Dropbox. So he was all about it. So he's the one who actually had pushed us to be like, hey, we should go like just do something. I'd been doing like identity, fraud related stuff for quite some time, a lot of orchestration stuff with all sorts of vendors. We used to joke at Square sometimes that, hey, there's probably some company in this. None of us have the ego or the ambition to make it, but I'm sure someone out there will build something really great in this space. And I was joking with him. I was like, yeah, at least we can do this. In the back of my mind, I was also thinking at the very least that way when I go back and get a job at Square, it won't be like I went off and did nothing for like 6-9 months. Be like, oh, I was exploring on the same work I was doing, still relevant to my job. So that was honestly a lot of the impetus, what had led over to Persona. It was just an extension of a lot of the ideas that were already brewing for maybe 4 years, 5 years at Square, just observations on what we were seeing on some of the challenges within the space and otherwise.
What was the bit that flipped for you two when you went from just chatting about it to saying, okay, we're going to go start a company?
Charles was going to go off and start with someone else at that point. He was like fed up with me. I'd been telling him for like a year, being like, oh yeah, I'm going to quit at some point, right? Dragging my feet. I was really happy at Square. Like I'd been there for so long. I even had a quip that I stole from someone else there, which is life's too short to try new things. I was kind of heels dug in and he was like, oh, I'm going to go think about other startups, think about doing something else. Got a little worried about that. And I was like, oh, shoot. So at that point, I was like, why not? Let's take like a 6-month sabbatical. We had this pact at that time. If it goes nowhere, we, would join the company together because we'd always wanted to work together in some capacity. It was just a question of like, would it be a startup versus at a company together? And my thought was like, oh, why not? I've been here for so long. Why not try this? I'm of the age in which, you get out your system and then I'll go back and be a corporate guy for the rest of my life. That's kind of what led to it.
So why do you think being such a reluctant entrepreneur, why do you think it's worked thus far? What I always have been curious about your story is it's the opposite of Silicon Valley lore.
Oh, that's the grand question, right? That's if I could answer that, all my existential, my imposter syndrome, all that would be cured in an instant. I thought about it. I have some theories on it. My immediate quip is probably half of the valley is backward rationalization, where we're like, oh yeah, this all makes sense. Then after, of course this all makes, how can you not tell, right? I've joked with some people right now that regardless of the outcome of AI, it's all going to be completely obvious in 5 years, right? Like how can no one tell that, this was all a sham or the greatest thing that we've ever seen, right? And everyone's going to be like, how could those people back then it was so obvious. At the end of the day, this is kind of where my, all the rationalizations come to. I think it's a combination of there's a motivation factor of like what continues to push you. And there's a lot of ways at it, right? And I've seen all sorts of founders with different motivations. The second, I think, is in the categorization kind of insight, or like just if you are like everything else, then the market already is kind of like discovered it's efficient. So at the end of the day, everyone, if you're trying to find edge of any form, it's, are you different from everyone else, right? And if the market pulls too heavily on one way, it flips the other. It's kind of like that, right? So like when the Silicon Valley lore is pushed so heavily in one direction, I can kind of see a second kind of rise up. On the motivation factor side, I think a big part is like, I've seen like founders get motivated by something like just they have to see this vision come out to the world, right? Some sort of product vision. I actually think a very fine motivation is just a desire to build a company. I actually think some of the best companies out there is just like a desire of any company and just a relentless desire to build that. Mine, I think at this point is a lot fueled by the sense of duty or just a fear of letting folks down. I mean, you know this better than anyone, right? There's a lot of folks at Persona now who I've known for a long time. Persona is one of their more unique traits of it is just the long tenure. A lot of folks that have been there for a long time. So I think that's kept me really motivated on just like making sure it continues. So that's kept it locked in. But I don't think like the lore or anything, all of that doesn't really matter as long as you have that motivation aspect. And then I think the second was like, can you bring some sort of unique insight? And I think the unique insight I have is that reluctance is fundamentally tied to a certain skepticism and cynicism. And when you're skeptical of like, this thing doesn't automatically work, in effect, I think that's a form of first principles in which you're almost by default asking like, why is like what everyone else thinking wrong? And that I think continually allows you to find some form of edge. And like, I oftentimes tell folks that identity is a very long and like kind of deep space. It's been around for a long time. So to find edge in it requires folks to really be able to constantly like kind of peel back the layers and find something no one else is thinking about, however small that edge is. And I think that cynicism helps, that reluctance has helped us differentiate. That's where I've kind of wound up at now.
So going back to you and Charles starting this company, you doing it somewhat reluctantly, you decided that given you had so much experience building a bunch of this infrastructure from scratch at Square, you kind of had an edge in that space. What exactly happened after you two said, okay, we're going to go start this company? How did you figure out what to start with, what the first version of the product would be? Did you spend much time thinking about how fractured and fragmented identity was?
So we knew how fragmented it was. That for sure. We were very well aware of it. The MVP part was hard. We knew we wanted to do something around identity. And at that point, it was a lot of like just setting small goals. The first goal we had was if anyone would pay us anything, we're game, right? And I think the first customer of ours was paying us like $50 a month. It was like the small e-commerce shop, like $50 a month. We were like, we'll build exactly what you want. A lot of what we do is like we build something. And then I think sometimes if you just keep on iterating with MVPs, you just end up with this Frankenstein of a product. So the second half is like, okay, can we generalize? Once you get to it's like, can we generalize, take a step back, not keep on selling and see, is there like some sort of common thread between these two? But we knew it had to be something identity related because we thought, one, we understood the space fairly well. We thought there was a lot of kind of ideas around like PII. The vision of Persona never really changed because the grand idea was pretty much, there is an opportunity to build a universal kind of like identity platform / network. And that doesn't really exist today, right? Because like in payments, you have like Visa, MasterCard. It enables everyone kind of collaborate. It enables every single merchant to benefit from, like shared risk intelligence or otherwise. And identity, it was super fragmented. Every business, every vendor, every technology was all fragmented. So we knew that end state.
So before you even started writing the first line of code, the long-term play was to build this consolidated end-to-end platform and identity as just a broad, squishy idea.
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that we knew that is a big idea. Like it's one of those things in which for us, like we weren't creating a brand new industry. I feel it's like that's why there's so many competitors in this space too. It's such a crowded space because I think the idea behind it is just so obvious, right? Like I always tell whenever someone new joins, I never tell them like, oh, we have a market risk. Like just identity's not a market risk company. It's fundamentally really an execution risk. And it's a very high execution risk because the idea is just so obvious. To me, it's like kind of online payments where you can argue how large is it? There's all sort of questions there, but is it a utility? Isn't it valuable? I mean, I don't think anyone would ever argue that. Of course, like being able to just transact online has to be valuable from day one. And I think the idea of like a real identity is very similar in which, wanting to know who someone is and like, is there a person behind it? That's just a very kind of tried and true idea. And then the second part of that is because the idea is big, if there is a way to consolidate and like, build a large business, I think a natural offshoot of that would be a large business. That in and of itself, we never really had a question about. So like how it was nebulous and fluffy, but we never kind of had to like steer away from that. The question then became like, how do you navigate, these infinite paths to get there?
And why did it not keep you from starting the company? Why did you not just say it's in some ways overfunded, there's too many competitors, and thus it's uninteresting?
I think the benefit of not having an expectation of success made that really possible. And my thought at the time, a lot of it was, I'd rather do something I kind of understand than like just completely something random and then afterwards go back and try to explain to everyone, oh yeah, I learned a bunch of stuff about something that I'll never use again. And that's great. So that felt as if I was just continue deep in my understanding of something. That joke earlier, life's too short to try new things. I was like, hey, I've done so long of like identity. Why not continue to understand it a bit better? And the second half was just that we had so little expectation of getting anywhere. Raising any capital at all, I think was like kind of cool. Can't believe that happened. And I think on every leg of the journey, even today, I'm very surprised of where we are. But I think that lack of expectation made it such that, you can kind of continue along with it and continue to try to push on this space, continue to try to develop it.
Okay, so we took a little bit of a detour, but you had the broad direction you were going to go. And then the question was, where do we start? And you mentioned you started with this e-commerce company and just did whatever they wanted. Where did the company come from? Why did you care about going and building a widget for them? Like, what's the whole backstory?
We'd actually met y'all. We just got out of our YC interview at that time. I think we weren't planning to do YC regardless. We didn't want to drive down constantly. And at that time, we were like, oh, I don't know. I don't even understand why exactly we didn't want to do YC. But one of our good friends, mutual friends, Nico, he actually wrote our entire application for us. And he submitted it, gave some light feedback, like, Nico, I'm not doing it anyway, so just try it, right? So I went down. We drove down that day, did the interviews. We're on our way back up. I think we stopped at a coffee shop because a friend of ours, hey, one of my friends, he runs a small e-commerce shop. They need to do kind of age verification for the things they're selling, right? So we're like, cool, put us in touch. And we chatted with them. And that's actually our first customer. Just at that coffee shop, I called the guy. He's like, I'm only gonna pay you $50 a month. And I'm like, I'll do anything. $50, that's more than zero. We're at zero right now. So I'll take that deal.
So you had not written any code at this point?
We'd written some code because it felt bad to do nothing all day. So we'd written a lot of code to allow us to deploy. We had the base of an app. We'd written a bunch of just small MVPs and things like that.
But void of talking to customers or anything, just building.
Yeah, but we knew, as both of us are engineers, we're there's just that finite stuff. Yeah, you have to deploy. You have to have some database out there. You got it. We had sign up GCP. We knew kind of had some base of a deploy system, some testing. At that time, the joke was might as well, every single day, build out the foundation that just does something. But I think this was maybe month 2 in which we were chatting with him. And one of our first goals was just, if we can get any customer, if anyone's paying us anything, at least we can go back and say we had one person paying us. So I think we stopped there. And then at that point, we kind of really started revving and started building something for them.
What did you hear from that customer and what did it lead in terms of what you would build?
So that was kind of interesting at that time because what they needed was kind of age verification because a lot of their segment were younger age, 18 to 22, in which you have a thin credit profile, database-based verification would be tough. At the same time, you're buying something from e-commerce. I think one of the bigger challenges then is the speed of it has to be fast. You can't just wait for a long time. So a lot of folks would submit government IDs, a lot of government IDs, right? That would be submitted. So we were okay, let's take a look at the state of the art. A lot of the state of the art at that time was getting a person to actually look at it. And, that could take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. So that's kind of our first impetus for the first product was let's just automate that. Let's see if that's actually possible. So that became kind of the impetus for our first, core product, which is government ID, verification in a fully automated way. And that kind of led to another customer who was interested in that technology, but viewed it more so from a fraud prevention perspective, where they're oh, I could collect government ID to do fraud prevention. And we started introducing biometrics as a way to kind of help stop fraud as well. Because comparing the face to kind of a government ID would be a double kind of pseudo 2-factor kind of approach towards physical identity verification. So that was kind of the evolution of where the kind of platform evolved. But the benefit, one kind of crazy thing we had at that time was, I think as soon as we got that e-commerce shop, the position of the business was we will never get 2 customers who do the same thing. And that I think was kind of really wild at that time.
Why did you choose that? Right. The obvious conventional wisdom is you want to narrow in on a customer profile and then focus on that customer profile for months or years and then move on to the next customer profile. You obviously did the opposite.
I think a lot about these days, a much more personal reason why I think that was the case was even at that point, I don't think we become fully convicted that there was any business here. I almost feel as if I was far past our Series A before I really kind of realized, oh shoot, this might actually be somewhat of a real thing. At that point, I think I was always under this feeling of, I don't think this is real. And I just need to figure out why this actually is not a real thing. It's like we're living in some fantasy land right now. And like, there's not a real, like actually long-term business here. We're just going to get far somewhere and then we're going to just hit a hard wall. So I think at that point, what I was really trying to prove to myself was like this idea that something universal that could actually go cross-platform, that's just a farce. Like it doesn't exist. Because like a lot of identity prior to this is very verticalized. You'd have all sorts of businesses who are all like, they all have this idea of we're going to build this universal thing. But in reality, it oftentimes is just a vertical, like, hey, we generally focus on fintechs and like some maybe payments in particular, we generally focus on this. So I had a very strong conviction, like they all probably are right. I just don't know why it's not possible yet. I was like, let's just get that out of the way, find out that there actually isn't a business here so we can stop wasting our time. Vincent, the first person to join us, he had like flown down, was living on our couch at that point. And I was like, Vincent, you go back to Seattle, you go home, like I feel bad that you've like come out here on this startup. So let's like spend these next 3-4 months and we'll figure out like why this is a terrible idea. There's nothing here. So we had this whole thing. And then like even, after a couple more folks joined, I think the first bit was all about like, is it even possible to close customers across and vertical? Can we figure out how to speak to each one of them? It was really it didn't make a lot of sense at that time. But I think a lot of it was driven by this idea of it's better to prove that this doesn't work sooner rather than, continue to like fool ourselves.
What's the story behind the first 5 or 10 customers that came after it? And what was the actual product that you were selling? Because the first product was this quick government ID verification product that you sold to this e-commerce company.
Yep.
And then how did you end up with the next handful of customers? And was it the exact same use case?
I was really maniacal. No same use case, like has to be different use cases and it had to be different industries. So we really pushed on that.
But it was all because you wanted to invalidate the idea as fast as possible, not because you thought it would be the most likely way to not become a verticalized niche player.
So I said that a lot. Like that's what I said back then. And I reflect on it a lot because these days you go through all sorts of self-reflection of who you were 6 years ago. I think like I said that I was like, oh, like the only way we can actually prove that this is actually a big business has to be that. And when I think like in self-reflect and like introspect, I think the real reason was more because I really kind of want to prove like that, I don't know. I was like so scared of like just wasting everyone's time and like pretending as if there was something big here. Cause the reason why I've introspected so much on that is like, I think the rational thing would be, hey, we should do this, like, and like first like chunk grow, and then we'll figure out those problems later on. But I don't know. The early days was so much about like invalidating core kind of like long-term problems as opposed to like just trying to get off the ground, which was kind of insane. But that's why I say, I think actually in truth, it probably was driven by this personal feeling of, I don't know, I just didn't want to like spend like 4 years on this, realize that there was like a dead end of a company and then like have to go tell all these people, I'm sorry, I was wrong. And like, I've been lying to all this time that there was this like grand vision and I understand this grand vision.
So do you think that approach in those first few months is actually a good approach? That other people who are starting companies should consider doing that, even if you kind of did it for maybe the wrong reasons? Or do you think it was somewhat anomalous that it happened to randomly work in this thing that you're trying to do at Persona?
Every great business, I think, has an atypical path. All of them, every single one of them. There's something kind of like unique. And I think about that because I think the core of it is that you just like, if you like start doing what everyone else is doing, there's just no, there's no edge anymore. There's no opportunity. So I think every business, like at the end of the day, there's something atypical about it. I don't think many people go down this like heavy kind of like invalidation path, but there's also like great business. One I always hear, what was it? I respect a tremendous balance, Rippling. Like Parker Conrad's approach on Rippling was we're going to build like consolidation from day one. We're going to build a massively ambitious platform from literally Series A, not launch for multiple years. I have a good idea of exactly what we're building here. We're not going to talk to anybody. And then we're going to unveil it and like really just go. And like it's taken off, right? And I think that's a crazy approach. A lot of people are all about like the lean MVP, whatever. I think like any kind of approach, if it's differentiated enough. So the second half is like, can other companies do it? And I think that's where the founder personality probably comes into play, because I think for many others, especially at Persona, when they hear that like that was kind of our approach in the early days, it's not like, oh, that's insane. It actually, when I've told some of my close friends about this outside of work, they're like, yeah, that sounds like something you would do. And I think that's kind of where it comes to, is like most likely whatever approach that works for your business, it'll probably sound like something if you told your close friends, it'll be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Exactly how you'd probably approach the problem or think about it.
Let's go back to the story of the next handful of customers. Like, what did you build? How did you find them?
one of our customers, the first engineer who joined us, Bill, he'd attended one of the first round events, and he was talking with another company here, and he was like pitching like, hey, we do identity verification, and like that's actually how we found the next one. I think they were within the marketplace space, helping kind of connect parents with sitters. And, they need to do some things around like fraud prevention, background checking. So that was actually how we discovered the next customer for us, which was, hey, all right, well, and then we kind of iterate on the platform, adjusted kind of like the core, kind of like
to meet their needs.
Right? A lot of that became kind of later on. I mean, this continuous iteration of like, we work with there's a crypto company in which like their core consideration really was about like global onboarding and streamlining kind of KYC AML. So that was very different from both the age verification and kind of fraud prevention approaches. So we kind of like had to adjust the platform kind of meet their needs too. And I mean, a lot of the early customer, where there was a fintech customer, and theirs was similar to the crypto one about KYC AML, but like with kind of variations. They were much more US focused, and they had a demographic they were really trying to serve. So we partnered with them too.
When you were talking to those customers and sort of effectively building a custom solution, or maybe half of the solution you were repurposing your existing infrastructure and half of it, I guess you were just spinning on the fly for them. When you were talking to them about being a customer and talking to them about the product, even if it didn't exist, that you were building, was there a lot of pull from them? Like they were telling you they have a lot of pain, this is exactly the type of thing we need? Or like, what was the reaction you were getting from those early customers?
They were all small. I mean, one of the bigger challenges early on, we all came from kind of like tech industry. So we'd also met a lot of larger customers, and we got a lot of no's. They were like, we're not going to work with a seed stage startup on like managing personal information. There's just no way, right? Like we're, borderline public, there's no way. So we got a lot of no's back then. So at that time, working with a lot of these early companies, I wouldn't say they had a burning problem. They're a startup, usually like a couple founders, a couple other folks working with them. They hadn't really had a team dedicated to this. And we could definitely talk to them. It's like, hey, we're just effectively an outsourced identity arm for y'all.
That's what you said to them?
I mean, we didn't say exactly like that, but it's like, we talk with them exactly how they should think about their problems. And we're like, we can adjust our platform to meet that, right? Like we understand exactly what they give. Kind of really the first salesperson who joined us, Dan, who now does product here, he told me, you were challenger salesing people before they're, but without reading the book. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, dude. I don't read. If you've ever read the Challenger sale, I think that's what it is. Like we're really just trying to understand their problem and then proposing a solution and being like, if you're game, that's the solution we'll deliver for you. And that's kind of like what got them kind of through it, because they were looking for advice. I mean, identity is one of those spaces in which you're probably, if you're early, you're not going to hire someone to focus on identity. It's just not within like your first 10 or even 20 hires, except for very specific spaces. Generally, you're trying to find product market fit, just build out core product. Identity is kind of an auxiliary thing. And having someone both provide advice, because, I understood a lot of the problems within the space at that time, provide advice, be genuine, like, honestly, from a pricing perspective, also just very generous pricing. And like building trust on delivering that solution, I think resonated a lot. And like many of those customers, especially the ones who are still operating, they're still with us.
Were you concerned at the time that when you went up market, no one was interested?
Throughout our Series A, that was a major concern for me, right? Was just like, is it even realistic? Like that became the next, after I kind of had settled on the idea of it's probably possible to go horizontal and like try to go after many industries. I think after about like 10 or 20 customers, we did this grand re-architecture because we realized like everything had gone too kind of, bespoke. So we created this whole versioning system of like our products like now 2.0. No, it's not an external thing, it's just internal. Like we have to refactor it all. But after that, like kind of refactor, the next just constant concern for me was this myth of like, oh, we'd be able to like just level up and like, this idea of we'll start small and get slightly bigger customers, slightly bigger and slightly bigger. That would probably die. So that became like we were constantly wondering about it. And I think we were kind of able to get through it because even today, I mean, just never really stopped selling, right? Like for the largest customer, I mean, I'll be on a call at 9 p.m. tonight with a prospect because I'm always wondering, can we push that next kind of type of archetype of customer? And someone's always kind of pushing towards, can we grow up market? So yeah, I mean, we were able to kind of like, I guess, staircase our way up, but it was for a long time before I realized. And even once we started getting like later stage startups, we started wondering, is it realistic to work with like public companies? Is it, and I mean, there's still a lot of major industries I don't think we've broken into still today. And I still wonder, is it possible?
Were you worried that you were just creating a consulting shop for identity as opposed to an actual products company?
No. Well, the reason why I say no is at that time, I didn't think so because I didn't really care if it was a consulting shop or not. I was like, if we get a customer, that'd be great. And the second one is how we were pricing them was like we're pricing a product. That's why it was so unbelievably like a good deal is that, we were just the cheapest consulting shop. And like the product itself, like as long as we had faith that we could like repurpose it, I wasn't too worried. Like it wasn't like we're just building a brand new solution every single time. It really did feel as if there was this organic evolution. And even as we're building things, we always in the back of our minds had an idea of, I could see how we could like, reconsolidate these two into a generalized kind of idea. So there was never really this idea. The solutions were never so far apart. And because we had the vision that one day all these identity operations, all these identity verification methods, this whole identity platform will all sit together, it never felt as if we were like doing wasted work.
When you think back to the first few dozen customers, did you continue to just take anybody who was interested in what you were doing? Or at some point, did you develop a point of view?
So we had two types then, which we probably would not work with. Identity is like a very sensitive space. There's a lot of like regulatory, legal kind of pressures in it. Sometimes I think some of the asks were, I'd probably say like not kosher, probably not within our wheelhouse. So I actually will never forget because the first customer, this might have been customer or potential customer number 3 or 4. They were offering $5,000, which, when you're working in the land of like $50, you're like, holy moly, 5,000. I won't say what their ask was, but the ask was weird. I was like, and I remember turning to Charles because we were at that time like, holy crap, that's like, we'd be able to tell everyone 100x growth. Think about 100x growth month over month. We at this point, we're joking that we could like, we'd be in Google and like 100x every single month. We had Google scale in no time, maybe, 12 months. I don't know. I remember we were like putting in like a Google Sheets pretending how fast that we could just keep getting it. The next one's, 500,000, just continue. But then once we heard their ask, we're like, this is really weird. And I'd feel, I wouldn't feel good doing this. It took some confidence to turn that down. I think what we'd said was like, 5,000 still isn't enough to pay both of us. So it's not worth it, man. Like we shouldn't do this. And like we turned to each other and we're like, yeah, we're going to not work on this one. You guys can probably find something else. That was a test of character for us. We're pretty proud of like turning that one down. I know it's not a lot of money, but we were pretty proud of that. And I think later on that helped at least like set the foundation for once we got bigger as a company, there were a couple other really large opportunities and at this point, it was actually meaningfully sized opportunities where we're like, this is weird. I don't think we should do it. So those were ones we always turned down. The second types were ones where it strayed a little too far from like what we thought would sit in this unified identity platform. I don't know quite like exactly. So it's like there were a couple things around like more so like what about this person versus who they are. We always knew like if there's an identity platform, what we should always focus on is this core question of are you who you say you are? And like, with all that, like all these other additional things. But we knew that like the question that we didn't want to answer is, things about you, right? Like, are you credit worthy? Are you a background check? Like, because of my work a lot on Square Capital, I knew pretty in depth that there's a hard separation between are you who you say you are versus, like, hey, should you have access to something and all of that. So there were a lot of asks then, which really helped us narrow our scope and make sure that we didn't ever get into, too wide of a vision. So whenever it felt as if someone was asking for, say, a background check, we'd be like, we're not a background check provider. There's a lot of really, really great businesses doing that. But we answer the question of, are you who you say you are? Not, should you have access? So that helps narrow the scope sometimes.
So then at call it 15 or 20 customers, what was the shape of the product at the time?
We had a bunch of modules, which like a lot of like just these modules. And I think like we'd sometimes hard coded, especially for some customers, like, hey, these modules sit together for this person's flow. Already for some customers, we'd already built out some rule logic to be like, hey, like if it's, if they had this configured for them versus this, we had a whole concept called a template, which is every single business had a template, which now like runs everything on our business. Every single thing is a template now. But we had already built out this concept of a template. It would be the generalized idea of what specifications they have for all these modules and how they'd all orchestrate together. But we'd also had a lot of hard-coded stuff where it's like, I can't figure out exactly how to logic this right now, or the logic engine that we first started with to do all the orchestration wasn't powerful enough to support them. So, we'd be like, if it was this customer, do this. And at 1520, we realized this was like getting unwieldy. So we kind of had stopped, pulled back a bit on like continue hire on beyond Dan, who, honestly, at this point didn't really operate as a sales. He was like product plus sales. Once we hit that, we were like, hey, we really need to like rethink, recalibrate, kind of do the platform at this point in time.
Were you just doing founder-led sales for those first few dozen customers? that was sort of part consultative, part sales, as you were saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would be Christy, our COO, still with us today, but like, she was the fifth or the third person to join us. Christy, myself, Dan, Vince, honestly, the whole company kind of at that point, like almost everyone was on sales in some way, shape or form. But yeah, I was for sure.
At what point did you feel like we might have product market fit? And how do you define what product market fit is or was?
Oh, that's the grand question. My sassy answer to that is product market fit will the product be large enough for for your investor expectations of how large your product needs to be? And if that's the answer, I wonder all the time. I don't know if I've ever really found product market fit. I'm always, because, you're always like, oh, are you really going to hit the size and expectations of, what all your investors have? So, and by the time you even get close to it, at that point, if you waited long enough, your existing investors will, push you to already go and like expand the vision anyway. On those ends, I don't know. Like, really, it's like I would say around probably towards the end of our Series A, in which we're about 100 customers at that point, I knew there was a business here. I don't know if it's a venture scale business, but I was like, this is a business. And in all honesty, I don't think we ever wondered, could a business be built in this space? It's, can you build a massive scale business? And that, I think, was, I probably am just starting to feel that that's possible now. Within the last year or so, I'm like, yeah, I think there actually is really, really something big here. But I mean, it took a long time.
What changed? What did you see, or what changed in your thinking that caused you to think that now there is a real path here?
A couple of things. I mean, a lot of the core risks had disappeared, right? I mean, the stat we sometimes share is 3 of the top 5 largest companies in the world, it's work with a persona. And now I do believe, we may not have figured out all of our go-to-market messaging, but I do feel there is a way in which persona can work for every single thing. My core 2 big risks was, is it possible to build something that universal, horizontal across many, many different use cases? And 2, can you do it at scale? And what the largest companies find this to be valuable? Those 2 I really do believe are true now. And I think persona can support both of those. The second one is really I think this question of who is someone online has become more important than ever. If you believe that AI and agents are going to be so powerful online, in which you really can't differentiate, is this a person online anymore? I mean, there's nothing really stopping. Genuinely believe that within the next 2-3 years, you won't be able to differentiate human behavior from agentic behavior. CAPTCHAs are already better solved at this point than by AI. Zero shot models can already solve some of these oh, we're going to randomize the challenges you're solving. They're so good at this, right? You're watching O3 tackle the ARC challenge better than humans at times. It's really quite incredible. I think what we're going to start seeing the internet move towards, in my belief, is it's not a question of, are you a human or a bot anymore? That's just an irrelevant question. The behavior, at least, is not possible to distinguish. It's really just going to be, if this is a bot, who's accountable for this bot? And who are you who's in charge? I mean, all internet traffic, all activity, someone's accountable for it. Some human at the very tail end of it is the person who's this is my thing. And that has made me really feel as if this future in which who online is going to be really important. Because there's a longer term existential question of how important is it to know who is someone online? There was this question in the back of my mind, beyond these 2, a far larger one, which is, what if everything online, maybe one day, who are you just doesn't matter? And now I'm watching AI and all that. I'm no, actually, in fact, it's the opposite that's true, which is, who are you is the only question that matters, probably. It doesn't mean that you should de-anonymize the person, but you have to be able to trace something back to yeah, there's some human at the very, very tail end of this.
Let's sort of go back to kind of those first 100 customers. What was going on with the pricing model over that period of time? And were you worried that at some point, this sort of consultative sales or sales motion has to map towards an ACV that's not $500?
Yeah, of course.
Because there's a difference between somebody's finding value in the product and somebody willing to pay you for that value. And if ultimately a customer was worth $300 to you, it'd be very hard to make a fantastic business out of that.
So I think that we did get a couple of larger customers at this point, ones who were paying maybe a couple tens of thousands a month. That had helped and that was somewhat random, to be honest, in which we just got a customer in which they were oh shoot, this is great. And we just need someone to do this. They were still rather early stage, but the problem for them had become so big, and the amount of modules that we built out, they just really found a click with the platform at that time. So at some point, I don't remember exactly when, but I don't know why, we were never really too worried about, will someone pay enough for this? So that never really kind of had crossed our mind. I do think the consultative sell process, that is, and I think will always be a worry for me, because it's a really hard sales motion. And there's a question of like, can you scale out this sales motion? This goes to a much broader kind of challenge, which is if you're trying to sell a platform, like inherently selling a platform means that your overall go-to-market messaging becomes like really tricky. And in particular, it becomes hard to scale because like it's no longer just this is what we do, but instead we help solve this entire problem. Then you have to help solution people to show how the platform can help solve that. That inherently means that you can't like train up as many salespeople. You can't like scale out a go-to-market team. There's just all sorts of complexities involved with that. That I think will always be a concern on like how large and how quickly can you grow. I don't know. I don't think like I've never really kind of had the thought of like, oh, like that shouldn't be the way that we sell things.
Maybe talk more about like some of the things you figured out in bringing a true platform that can do many different things to market versus, a single point solution.
The first one I'll reiterate on is like the go-to-market motion for selling platforms is fundamentally different. One of my core beliefs now is that you pretty much have to do a bit of like founder engaged, like almost at all scales. The founder will never be fully disconnected from sales because like understanding it's no longer like, here's the simple thing that solves this problem anymore. You always have to understand like a platform at its core is solving not so much like, a core problem statement, but rather an entire suite of different problems, right? Like the value of a platform is that it's dynamic and solve many different problems. Inherent within that becomes there is a solutioning nature to all of your sales process. And the solutions people are looking for will probably continuously evolve. So if you go towards the platform motion, I think that you will never really leave a founder engaged sales motion at any sort of scale. I mean, going back to Rippling again, because I think Parker's just incredible, at least as a founder. He forever engaged, right, on sales. I mean, you look at this guy, like he is consistently on Twitter on always trying to understand what the buyer problems are and what businesses' problems are. So that's one. It's like I've become, sometimes as a founder, especially as a technical founder, you're like, oh, maybe one day I can like stop being, on the sales side of things. But now I'm like, no, I think like if you're going to build a platform business, you will never stop. It's very important to continually understand. And like the problems evolve constantly. I mean, especially within our space right now with AI, with, all sorts of new regulations, with deglobalization. You're just always going to be like in the process of like understand problems, translate back into how the platform can solve it, add in the building blocks or, whatever kind of components, whatever you want to call them in your platform to make sure you continue to meet the needs of like all the new things out there. And I think this has a really challenging translation to how do you scale out a go-to-market motion around this? Because your top level messaging will be easy. The top level messaging will be like, I can solve all your problems around identity. For example, using Rippling again, it's like your all-in-one HRIT, finance solution. That gives you an all-in-one kind of messaging. But once like no buyer is buying all-in-one, right? Every buyer is buying something that's like targeted towards them that your all-in-one can solve. And training folks to be able to always connect those two dots is really, really challenging. Not to mention the more powerful your platform, the more things you have to train salespeople on. So like you're almost constantly trying to catch up. So enablement as a result becomes one of the most important things, making sure that you can scale out how you kind of teach out your sales team. And the second thing that probably becomes even more important, like a lot of times if you have a PLG, like single product motion, you can scale out sales and like post-sales, oftentimes you can figure out like a more scalable solution for it. Post-sales becomes just one of the most important things for any sort of platform engaged solution, because even if you're able to like connect the dots on like, hey, here's how my solution translates over, the implementation, the support model, all of that becomes so important. I think a lot of businesses, especially ones who have like, I mean, one of the most complex platforms in my mind these days is Palantir. Like their platform is just unbelievable, can build anything you can possibly imagine. For them, like they have such an innovative like go-to-market motion in which they blended and like re-architected and rethought truly from first principles idea of what sales and post-sales is. They've really made that far more nuanced, because I think the more complex your platform becomes, the more customized, the more your go-to-market motion entirely will be differentiated probably from any other business out there. You won't be charting on like the same, you will not engage on the same paths. There's not really a tried and true motion you can copy anymore. Hiring people will suddenly become very different as well, because if you hire, say, a VP of sales from one place to another, they're going to also have to learn about, hey, this is really different. Like you have to hire VPs who are comfortable with, flexibility and like evolving their existing conventional wisdom, a willingness to kind of think things from first principles with you on what an entire go-to-market motion looks like. So platform businesses, I think like, all products aside, which I think has its own set of challenges, but I do think you can kind of map and like figure it out. On the go-to-market side, I think is going to be super, it is hard to overstate how differentiate your go-to-market motion probably will end up looking for any sort of platform business. And that becomes hard to explain to all sorts of people too.
On this theme, I think conventional Silicon Valley advice is sort of as you begin to scale, you want to get out of the consulting and customizing business. So you sort of standardize the widgets that you're selling and you standardize the way that you sell them. Over the last year or so, you've always had a highly consultative element of the business, but it feels like you're going in the other direction, which is you want to go as hard in this sort of consultative style of pre and post sales. Maybe talk about like how you landed on that.
There's a lot of what I would call like pseudo platform businesses. And when I say platform business, like I have to kind of like define that. I mean, to me, a platform business is one in which you have multiple products that are truly like independently used, ideally by many teams. Like, you are just not like a single SKU. I think like a lot of businesses are effectively single product with maybe a constellation of features that are also being sold too, and like that you can upsell. But like it really is this single kind of like product, right? And generally, this product can either be for multiple use cases or one use case, but it's really kind of like the core product that you have. I think the difference of a platform business is really you're selling a whole suite of products to solve some ambiguous problems companies have. And you're mapping multiple products into solutions for every one of them. And the product mappings there probably will be pretty kind of like dynamic and ambiguous. And I think that kind of overall setup is really quite different.
So what was the story behind your first one or two real enterprise customers?
I mean, the good news for us, we didn't have to change much of our go-to-market motion because effectively what we were doing is enterprise sales for startups, which, incredibly scalable. So that didn't change too much. Like we had a very large company engagement since the early days of like, oh, we'll build all sorts of things. Like in our DNA was we'll build things for new deals as necessary. So there wasn't also this like cultural misalignment of, if you go down a platform, trying to build a platform, you oftentimes, I think for product side, you have to have a culture that's more comfortable with reactivity. Right. So that I think like culturally too, like for enterprise, oftentimes the big like shock, I think for businesses in which like they're very heavily PLG into enterprise is suddenly your roadmap, all your planning, how you think about the product becomes a lot more reactive. And oftentimes that creates all sorts of chaos. But we didn't have too much of that problem because we're already doing that for startups. The first enterprise deal for us depends on, how you define enterprise. But I would say our first like large, like multi-billion dollar company that we're working for, that one, I think, was a $5,000 contract for a year. It was the smallest thing, but we were like, we just, again, the insecurity of all is like, gosh, we need to just get someone who's big. So we like built something completely custom for them. Charles actually built it completely custom. Paying us $5,000 a year for it. And I think he spent a good couple of weeks. I mean, if you're talking the ROI, that's as negative as it gets.
Why did you choose to do that?
We had to get it. I mean, we were just like, it's like this, like the staircasing of like, hey, could we find, could we get this next thing? Could we even do it? We had no one. So we're like, hey, yeah, of course we'll do it. We want to just see if we can like actually close someone of that size and they would trust us. Because one of the other kind of like outstanding questions was, would anyone trust a company so small to deal with such sensitive information?
What's the type of thing that was built for them?
It was something for Japanese identity verification. Like, I mean, and it's really crazy stuff for Japan. Like for example, all their ID cards, they don't use a Gregorian calendar, right? So like we had to do a lot of custom work to make sure, even for like Japanese date parsing, making sure that it respects the imperial calendar there and all sorts of aspects. I think we also had built a module for them around, license plate verification, which isn't used anymore. It was like a very temporary thing, but I think that's how we got our foot in the door. It was like, we're just like, yeah, well, we'll build a classifier for license plate detection. If you'll work with us. And I think that at least create the relationship. So that way we could continue to work with them on other projects as well.
And so did it look like you, in whatever way, got connected with this customer and you were just rooting around for anything that they couldn't find somewhere else that you could build for them?
Honestly, yeah, as long as it was like even tangentially related to identity. Like, I mean, the license plate stuff was like effectively not related at all, but it was the same team. So we're like, oh, it's good to be able to just work with them. And frankly, we'd gone so many no's up until that point. I mean, you could stretch the imagination of what makes sense anymore. As long as it was something technical that didn't require, like too much, I probably would have said yes to.
Were you able to take that customer and turn them into a platform customer?
Yeah. No, that was the other big unlock. Is they're one of our largest partners now. We continue to work with them today.
How did you go from this Japanese license plate widget to them being a full Persona platform customer?
Well, part of it was like after that, they came to us with more and more problems. And I think that's one of the core things of why like the solutioning component becomes so important is either you push the solutioning up front, like early on in the process.
Talk more about what you mean when you say solutioning up front.
Solutioning up front, meaning like helping them like craft out, hey, this is all the problems we're going to solve and this is how we're going to solve it, right? Like the same motion that I talked about from the earliest days of the startup in which, we were like, what's your problem? This is how we propose to solve it. That's really fundamentally solutioning. You do that for all enterprise deals, right? Because like for enterprises, it's very rare that they're coming and saying like, I want this product. Usually enterprise motion is more like, hey, I have this problem. Who is the person who's going to help me solve this end to end? And now you come in this process, like this is how we're going to solve it. And you're proposing effectively a custom process because for them, they want the whole process kind of like solved. They don't want just, like, oh, we'll figure it out ourselves. That is kind of like the fundamental solution part. It's like we would explain, hey, these are all the parts of persona that we have, and this is how we'd solve your problem. Here are some things we're missing, but we will commit to building that, whether contractually or otherwise, to help you get like this end-to-end thing done. That I think like for usually you're either going to do that whole process really upfront in which like, for companies in which you land larger contracts earlier, I'm mentioning Palantir. Palantir would be a business in which they do a lot of that upfront. You could also do that like kind of on the post-sale side in which like you first get something small, prove out value, and then gradually work with them to continually solve more and more problems. We follow more in that motion in which like a lot of our long-term kind of partnerships emerge over time through doing a really great job, proving out value, and then them coming and thinking of us hopefully increasingly as a thought partner in which we can help them continue to solve more problems that are like adjacent within this overall space for them.
Yeah, it seems like one of the dreams in building a software business is if you can be your customer's trusted confidant in and around your space, and that they're constantly coming, when they think of a problem, they think of coming to you with that problem. And that's sort of how you get NRR that's sort of top in class, I think.
I think that's definitely the dream, but I think in practice, the hardest part of that is the connection back to engineering and product and design, like the culture to support such a thing. Because like if a customer comes to you and they're like, hey, this is a burning problem, effectively what that means is, yeah, the roadmap we had, ignore that. That's gone, right? Predictability is out the window. So it requires a culture that really is comfortable with that reactivity. And that's why I think like a lot of businesses in which if you start off with like a single product motion, which is like, oh, feature this, feature that. And like every single quarter, you have like a very clear idea of this is exactly what this quarter will look like. And this is where we're going to wind up. That I think is why it becomes difficult for them to become this trusted confidant, because you're never going to move fast enough to actually seize on an opportunity they have. Like if a customer has a burning problem, they're not going to wait a quarter for you to go and like roadmap and plan this out for them. So that ends up carrying this motion in which like simultaneously, if you're going into a deal, you have a huge opportunity, a huge enterprise deal, but won't match that, whatever your cycle planning length is, everything kind of falls apart.
And so what does that mean for how you run roadmap and engineering at Persona?
I genuinely think almost every single thing that we build for one enterprise is almost always universally applicable. Maybe not to every single customer out there, but there's at least 5x the opportunity that one thing that we build benefits others. So I think that also helps a lot of folks kind of feel good about, because it's like we're just building one-off solutions. More often than not, it's a generalizable thing that every single customer will benefit from, or at least like some subset who are solving some type of problem, right? If we build like some sort of fraud solution here, it's a really generalizable fraud solution oftentimes. The second I think that helps with it a bit is, yeah, you have to know when to say no. Like sometimes, it's like we are just at capacity, and understanding that is important because, at the end of the day, I think a really core part of it is you just have to know where the company's sentiment, morale, state of it is, because it is really tempting. If you're confident for all these companies, their laundry list of things that they can come to you with is infinite. I mean, they have an infinite number of problems, which is great because that's a lot of opportunity for you to continually have ideas for your roadmap and on what you can build. But yeah, I think like burnout, like making it such that the company cannot scale, like not support everyone becomes a real problem too. And there's a lot of finite problems on scaling too, like how many kind of people you can add. Because the platform gets ever increasingly complex, onboarding continually, like without, streamlining things and, encapsulating things. I think we still had a lot of work actually at Persona to do on these ends, but we are trying to be thoughtful and invest in it. Like the onboarding becomes ever more complex too, especially to learn about the entire platform and make it such that I think one of the bigger challenges, especially on the product side, is can you enable folks to be productive and be able to build things without having to understand everything else. And I think that's both an architectural challenge as well as a product design challenge.
You've developed a very rare commercial sensibility as somebody that's super technical starting a company for the first time. And as long as I can remember, you've been as interested and obsessed with go-to-market pricing and packaging, product strategy, as you are with building something that solves the needs of a customer. I'm interested in like, how did you develop those muscles? Like, where did that come from? Was it something you were always curious about? Like, you were the type of engineering manager that was curious about the whole business, and that allowed you to develop those sensibilities?
I've now seen it emerge a second time for a whole different function, which I'll share too. But I think a lot of it was self-doubt, because I don't think this is the thing I catch myself a lot on. And I think it's very natural for a lot of founders to do it. But I definitely am not like, what I was going to say is like, I don't think I'm unique. I definitely fell prey to this, which is it's really easy for myself to be like, hey, this is something I don't understand. And because I don't understand, it's probably not important. Actually, early on, I didn't care much about sales. In fact, like I had told Dan, our sales product person, this thing in which, he was like, you really need, like the most important thing for startup sales. He was like giving me advice at that time. I was like, and I had this whole perspective, which oh my gosh, I hate myself for saying this. I can't believe I thought this way. It's like one of those, like when you're 16 and you just can't believe how you thought. I think I had said something. I was like, if the product's good enough, people will buy it.
But that's still a lot of founders say that.
Yeah. And I mean, I was saying that because I was like, I just don't need to learn about sales. Like I was trying to I think at that time, the reason in my head, I was saying it because I think I genuinely, part of me believed it. But the real reason I think I said that, and again, maybe this is all fueled by self-doubt, which is I think I said that because I didn't want to learn about it. I felt as if I've gone far enough in life, on the technical side, that's the secret of being, to me and where I've gone to. Those things I don't need to understand. Just because I'm ignorant on it, it doesn't actually matter. That's probably what I was thinking at that time. Honestly, after having said that, I kind of caught, I think I don't remember exactly how, but I was like, am I just trying to be intentionally ignorant to not learn something just so I can preserve my ego? And then, I was like, oh, maybe, and that became actually a huge insecurity, which I think helped me at least want to understand it better. And I still don't think I'm very good at it, I haven't spent nearly enough years or time at it, but understand that I probably am actively trying to avoid it has now made me almost over adjust into trying to be hyper attentive towards it. And that kind of helped. And I mean, this has emerged again because there was a period in which after, this whole understand commercialization, the business side of things, I had a period in which I was like, I don't need to understand the financials. The business is doing well enough. The financials will prove themselves, right? Why do I need to understand? I mean, these days I check the markets all the time and try to understand how to think about valuing companies, understand about, multiples and, what's best in class and all just how do investors think about things. But there was a real period in which I was like, that knowledge is pointless. If a business is doing well enough, the proof is in the pudding. And I think actually there's a lot of businesses at my stage right now and founders who think the exact same thing. They're like, why do you have to understand the markets? Why do you have to understand investor dynamics? You need to focus on building a business and the business is good enough, it'll prove itself. And I think that's just insane. It's yeah, maybe you could get there, but why be proud of your ignorance or something? Why aim to be ignorant? But I mean, I think that's crazy because I think about that. I'm like, oh, the whole time I was always under this impression of, oh no, I'm past that. Ever since the whole go-to-market thing, I don't fall prey to that anymore. And I caught myself doing that for honestly, probably multiple years in which I continue to think that way about the financial side of things. And then, I'm trying to deeply understand that a little better. But that's probably it, was catching myself and realizing I was celebrating my ignorance.
How did you learn about the commercial aspects of the business and develop sort of these sensibilities in a bunch of I find a lot of your most interesting thinking is around the commercial aspects of the business as opposed to the technical aspects of the business.
Man, my technical thinking sometimes pretty interesting.
I'm not technical enough to know. So there's a bias here.
No, that's actually all Charles these days. I don't think, honestly, these days, actually, as I've understood this stuff better, I've become a worse engineer, which kind of bothers me.
But you're a better Salesforce admin.
Hey, I haven't been doing that for a little bit. It got a little worse there too. I mean, part of it's the intent to learn, but other ones I get a lot of reps now on deals, right? And just obsessing over why this didn't work. Honestly, I think it's actually the core of almost becoming an expert on everything is to not oversimplify. I think another thing I think that's very common within, or just an observation I think about sometimes so common within the Valley for founders is this obsession with frameworks. Everyone loves new frameworks and new ways to think about things. And I think frameworks as a way to expand your thinking is very helpful. But more often than not, I find people using frameworks as a way to almost constrict and almost shortcut their thinking to be oh, of course, well, this framework says this. So, the details don't matter anymore. And I actually see this a lot amongst engineers too, in which you apply these wide generalizations to not find the understanding of a detail. And I think to master anything, the core of it's not reducing something down to these overly generalized frameworks or axioms, but rather to understand the nuance of why this worked in this case, but not in this case. And you see this, I mean, for professional sports too. Watching some of these interviews with folks, you find the details that professional athletes care about are usually so minute. You're just that's insane that you obsessed over that small thing to find to find an edge. But I think that's honestly like the trick of it is like for me, for like having been on so many deals, obsessing over why did we actually lose this? And why was it that the thing we did before did not work in this case? And I think if you continually think of things that way, I don't know if you'll become good, but you'll find a lot of like unique insights. And those unique insights eventually will merge into at least your differentiator on it.
So to sort of expand on this, when you poke at the way that you think about building this as a platform business versus a point solution business, like what is the origin of that thinking? How and where did you develop that way of thinking about the business?
I mean, the first one was this idea. I think I told about this to you like very, very early on, was all these companies that we would like just constantly celebrate. They're so small in comparison to, like these giants. And you've actually, like, we think about that first chasm, but it's like, what about the second chasm in which like very few are able to cross that one too? And that original thought emerged from, was actually a joke, a bit self-deprecating of one. But I think when I was at Square at that time, I was joking with someone once that, have we ever thought that all of our work at Square is smaller than Microsoft Word? Like everything we've done, all of our efforts, we're smaller than Microsoft Word, like something
not just smaller. I mean, a speck,
right? Like, and like Microsoft Word is just a speck in Microsoft's universe. And it's like a speck of a speck. And I think at that time we were joking about like, the sci-fi movies in which you realize, I think it was like Men in Black or something, you realize your entire universe is actually the locker for someone, or I think there was something like that. That original thinking was like what led to this idea of we celebrate all these specs and like somehow we're not observing that none of these specs have like become this grand thing, and just we're all praying that one day we'll be able to become it, and we have no idea how. We just think it'll happen. So it's almost like this idea. That's why I think a lot of founders all say this of, oh, you have to be first principles minded. Like, how can you be a first principle thinker? But to me, a lot of it, if you translate that another way, it's actually the avoidance of like generalized frameworks and like just I think you should learn frameworks, but like the reliance on frameworks is really, I think, the underlying of what actually is more important there. Because first principles, everyone will say they're first principles thinker. It's a very, like, of course I think with like no bias, but then at the same time, oftentimes anyone who I hear is a first principle thinker, they're very into frameworks as well. And to me, there's some sort of inconsistency between the two there. But yeah, on that overall thought, I think a lot of it is like finding things that break the pattern, things in which like whenever someone says, oh, of course is the way to do things, trying to find the counter example. Why is that just not the case? Another example, I can't remember who tweeted this, but I love this tweet so much. It was something about like, great companies hire great people. The best companies can hire anyone. And when I read that, I was like, that is such a banger. It's so interesting. Because, again, that's another like Silicon Valley line, which is you just have to hire the best people, right? But if you look at like the biggest and the best companies out there, it feels like they can just hire anyone in the world and they'll make them kind of successful. And I remember, like the subsequent tweets was like, the best companies can turn any person into ROI positive, which is like, like great companies, you have to find someone who's like really good and like bamboozle them into like producing ROI for you. Great companies, they don't care who you are. You're going to find value anywhere. But it's like lines like that in which it inverts the thinking, or like just frameworks that break the rule. Everyone talks about great culture, but like there's companies that don't have great culture. And I'm not saying you should build one without that, but like understanding the art of like building a great business oftentimes is everywhere. It's not like the set frameworks. It's like the combination of all these things that come together that create something really unique that all seem to just click and work together.
What does it actually look like as you're trying to learn and figure these things out? Is it mostly studying other companies? Is it finding people in these sub-disciplines who actually have generative sort of original thinking or first principles thinking? What are all the inputs to sort of the output being, we're going to build our platform in this way, or we're going to do this versus that?
Honestly, I think it's not the latter. I'm notoriously bad at like finding mentorship. I've tried many times. You always hear like these stories of like these great mentorship ones and stories of like, oh, they've helped develop each other for so many years. I'm just so bad at it. Like, it was a huge insecurity when I was at Square. There was a period in which I was like actively trying to reach out to people, but I'm like a bad mentee and I don't know how to like engage them. I'm so awkward and I couldn't figure out, how to ask them. I feel like I'm wasting their time too, and I don't understand why they would want to talk to me. So I've never been good at that. Even today, like, when I want to go out and ask someone for advice, I'm terrible at going out there and asking. Like, unless like the question's very pointed, I know exactly what I want out of them. Like, asking general feedback has not been effective, at least for me personally. I've seen a lot of people who are so good at that, and I honestly think that many founders by nature tend to be folks who are better at that, but I'm not, and I've never been. It's more so the former, and I think in like going out and like just trying to find the counter example, and I think a lot of that honestly is fueled by almost I like to tell folks I'm a kind contrarian. I'm pretty nice about it, but like I like to prove other people wrong in some way, shape, or form, or find something in which like it doesn't quite make sense exactly what they're saying. It's oftentimes trying to find whatever that doesn't meet kind of like what we're all, what we're saying here, just to show that like whatever the problem is, it's more nuanced and more complex, and there probably is a hidden variable that we're being overly generalized about. For companies, it'd be like whenever people are saying like, hey, this is the strategy, like finding something that's the exact opposite, whatever that may be, that does not match the pattern of the strategy everyone else is saying. A product building or strategy or like roadmap or anything. It's like, can you find something which it doesn't operate that way and it's still massively successful or otherwise?
Most people say just focus on your customer and ignore the competition. I think that's another thing that you think is just immensely incorrect. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
It's like honestly tied to the thing kind of earlier of like, it just feels like intentional ignorance. I get like the perspective where it's like, oh, then they're biased your thinking. But I mean, gosh, if you have to like bias, like protect yourself from bias by like putting on blinders, that just seems insane. It's like I have to cover up my eyes so that way, I can like actually have creative thought. That just seems bad, right? I don't know. It doesn't make too much sense to me. I think like competitor obsession is bad. I suspect where that advice originated from is probably it's really easy to be sucked into just being obsessed with what your competitor's doing because, like just the competitive nature of building startups, like there's this natural pull towards constantly watching everyone else. I mean, I kind of like could feel a subset of that too, even like for non-competitors, like you hear all this fundraising news, this company's growing faster than you. And like, no matter what, like this whole space is fueled by insecurity of some way, shape or form. So I bet that original advice, like if you obsess too much on competitors, you'll just get sucked into a hole and never think about your company. But again, I think like you need a certain level of maturity and like in which you can just pull yourself out of that for the same of like not paying too much attention to, other fundraising advice, but still learning about like, hey, this is the story they told that was kind of really effective and trying to pull out things that you can learn from that. For competitors, I think it's the same thing in which in every single space, especially if it's competitive space, everyone's trying to solve this problem together. There was almost a pseudo collaborative kind of nature in which every single person, at the end of the day, if you can pull back the idea that like it is a finite, like kind of a zero sum thing, we're all trying to solve the same world problems out there. And in that sense, there's a kind of collaborative nature of it. Learning from others, I think is important. To me, it'd be the equivalent of saying, I don't read kind of like I'm a PhD who doesn't read other papers. I don't like to understand. I like to rediscover calculus on my own. Newton, that guy's, poisoned my thoughts too much. And now I can't think of, non-Newtonian calculus. I think that just sounds insane. So I think like a lot more for every single company, you're building on the shoulder of giants. It's just a question of like, can you learn the things that are important? And I think for competitors, it's absolutely one of those things in which they're the ones who are the closest to your problem as well. And you should absolutely be looking at what prior art is or, the state of the art on their end.
How do you actually action on that? Or what does it look like to not be competitor obsessed, but to be competitor informed or aware of what they're doing? What does it actually look like for you as the CEO of the business, maybe, over the last 6+ years?
So in the earliest, it's different in the earliest days to where it's at now. The earliest days, a lot of it, frankly, was just reading about everything on every single competitor just to understand, like, are we doing something that someone else already has done, right? I think it's honestly a little bit similar probably to, I have a couple of close friends in academia, and it's kind of similar to the academic process in which just finding a problem that like some other person, some other PhD hasn't done already is really hard in practice. So oftentimes for the PhD, the first whole bit of it is just understanding the state of the art, the problem space you're in to find something different that no one else has really kind of tried to do already. So I think in the earliest days, it was that, like trying to find every single approach, as many of them as possible, understand that, hey, this one might have not worked for X, Y, or Z reasons, whether timing or approach or team dynamics, who knows what, but just culling through as much of like the overall space as possible so you can at least develop a unique perspective. And I think for a lot of early stage founders, that part they don't like because it's really disheartening, because you realize quickly that it's hard to have unique ideas out there. Like almost every idea you've had someone tried in some way, shape or form. And your final like unique idea, again, mentioning academia as an example, one of my close friends had said pretty much like the final idea you end up with in academia ends up being like just minutely different from the last one. Like it is so hard to push, especially for like popular spaces like AI research. Like it's hard to come up with super novel ideas. Back in the day, I mean, these days you're in a whole golden age, but back in the day it was hard. So I think that's like in the early days. I think like these days it's a lot more just keeping informed on like, hey, this is like a cool thing someone's doing right now. And it's like, it's working to some degree, but there's maybe some challenges there. And, is it something that we should either be looking at from partnering with them or, building something in like that's competitive because we believe a different approach might be more effective? Would this be something that's effective within our market segment? And I think even looking at adjacent industries is really important. I oftentimes tell folks that a lot of our learnings these days is not from like, just like identity verification companies, from cybersecurity. Like cybersecurity has a long, long history of threat detection. And like it's fundamentally in this bad actor kind of, detection of bad actor game. There's a lot of philosophies there that I think a lot of folks in the identity space oftentimes just doesn't look at. And they think of it more as like an adjacent space that's not really tied to it. And I mean, I think it's a lot about that. It's just like keeping informed on like what's kind of going on. In a way, I would kind of almost give the analogy of like, it's the evolution from being a PhD student trying to write your thesis into becoming more of a professor, in which like trying to master and just stay up to date of all the kind of new innovations happening.
Do you have sort of higher order thoughts on what makes markets well set up for a startup to go after and has a chance to build a very large business versus markets that tend to be more challenging? Is there a dominant strategy that allows a company to get outside of that stranglehold of, I guess it's competition or sort of something else?
So honestly, I think tech as a whole, like just the startup market these days is so wildly competitive, no matter what you pick anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've thought a lot about like, why is technology so hard now? And like, I do think, I mean, as someone who like kind of entered the tech space in like the early 2010s to now, like technology is wildly competitive. And I think a couple of things have changed things. The first of which is we're at the kind of tail end of the smartphone, innovation cycle of like just appify everything. There's some app for it all. Like everyone's tried everything. Second, there's so many more engineers now. Like engineering used to be a scarce resource. I don't think that's the case anymore. Not to mention, I mean, AI is making everyone be even more capable than ever. I'm watching some of the junior engineers, how fast they develop now. Like engineers are so quick on developing. I feel as if there's engineers in which it took, I've spent 10 years at it. I mean, in 2-3 years, they're all already caught up to me. And I think that's just crazy of how fast like people are growing now. So engineering, I don't think is a scarce resource anymore. And I think the cloud has changed everything. I mean, back in the day, like capital became a huge constraint to prevent companies from emerging. Now, as long as you have the cloud, you have the opportunity. I think some of that might be the thesis of first round. That's all happened now, right? So these days, I think every market's hard, is honestly my take. I think effectively building a startup breaks down to one of 3 categories. And those 3 categories is either number one, it's a brand new technology and you're going to just compete with every other company trying to figure out how to take advantage of this technology. I mean, AI was this, there was blockchain prior to that. And I mean, for AI, there are no matter how you look at an application of an agent, no matter how insane, there is someone else also doing it. And they are just as eager, just as excited, working just as hard. I mean, I hear how hard some of these like AI companies are working now, and it's crazy. I mean, it is so competitive. And you see all of them kind of going at it. We saw the same kind of emergence for blockchains. There's so much talent. The second kind of category I think that you have to go down, Figma is my favorite example of this. It's a company in which you effectively compete against a giant that just, it seems insane to compete against that giant. To me, it would be like saying, I'm going to like redo Google Docs or like beat Microsoft Word at their own game, right? And there are a couple of companies that Notion's done that, Figma's done that, in which it's a huge upfront investment and you're going to go on that journey and believe that with your under-resourced kind of product, you will be able to eventually take on something that has infinite more resources than you. And that's a really tough game because I think it's like usually those type of products requires like a 4 or 5 year kind of like heads down sabbatical kind of thing. And you'll go at it. I think the third category is the category we're in, which is a legacy space in which there's a bunch of competitors, so many competitors. Everyone's still been at it for a long time and you will out execute. But the underlying theme for all of these, the execution has become more important than ever. And it's not so much about like idea discovery or like untapped market discovery anymore. It's just a question of pick your poison on how difficult, it will be. But I think every space now is really challenging.
What does execution mean? Like, I feel like it's a word that, they just got out executed. What does it mean?
Honestly, I was going to say it's just time investment plus like time investment, ability of like, quality of kind of output plus time investment. And generally now you need both. You need like, quality ideas, quality kind of output of whatever form. And now I think it's just incredibly high time investment. And like, I think time, like investment of time of how hard are you working in comparison to someone else is just real. Like you have to, like if you're, you can, in the past, I think there just weren't so many competitors in every single space. People oftentimes could over time shift and adapt to their own lane. But these days, I mean, you almost always have a borderline direct competitive one in which there's a very strong pressure in which you have to find edge some way. Maybe your output of ideas is just consistently better than someone else. I think that's tough. Everyone's so talented now. There's, again, no more scarcity of inputs anymore. that it's usually more so like just time investment's hard. So I think almost every market is challenging now. And then at the end of the day, like even if you invest the same time, then it just becomes who has like consistently better, higher quality ideas at a faster clip and is more adaptive than you.
Now that you're 6+ years into this, are there things that you haven't shared that you just think for other people, the engineering manager at company X or company Y that's starting to build a company, are just things that you figured out that might be worthy of them thinking about, that might be useful in their journey and kind of going negative 1-to-1?
So I met with Kareem from Clay yesterday, and we both isolate on one thing, because I actually asked him for some advice too, because I think Kareem's journey is truly, truly incredible. And like, just to give a recap of it, Clay, I mean, right before we were talking, like they didn't start off with the product they have now. And unlike for many other startups, they went through constant iteration, a lot of discovery before they finally like just overnight found like the fit and it all worked out. But like even all the technology, there are a lot of things they built, plus like the cultural learnings and everything that took, 6 years plus probably to like lay the foundation there. And I'd ask Kareem at that point, like, how'd you get through it? Like that seems insane. I mean, I don't think I have I don't have the mental durability to last like that. And I think he shared something about it's a lot about the journey itself. Like he's like, I just ask myself every year, am I still having a good time? Do I still like doing this? The reason why I'm doing it, is it still why I'm doing it? And if I were to give advice on it, it's like trying to think about like, especially early on, it's so tempting to always think about like, oh, where's the destination going to be? What does the destination look like? And I oftentimes think people who are really obsessed on like the destination of things, they oftentimes really struggle the most as a founder. There's like almost a weird aspect in which like a lot of founders tend, not all, there's always exceptions to the rule, but like one thing for a lot of founders is that they have a tendency in which maybe they're like a less planning oriented. That's not like always clear exactly where things are going to wind up. There might be a little bit of, like a spontaneity to like the thinking of it all. I think that the reason why that somewhat exists is that folks who want to know what's next, it will be really hard. And especially if you are always trying to plan out, I will do this and then this will, this is what I'll gain from it and this is what's going to happen next. The startup journey becomes so tough. That's why I'm so impressed by Kareem oftentimes, because like I think those 6 years, you're constantly wondering like, oh, if this goes nowhere, like what am I going to do next? You have to exhaust all those thoughts and just not think about it. And some people are so maniacal about wanting a company, they can just ignore all of those. But for many, I think it's a very tempting thought of like, oh shoot, if this all fails, like what's next? And like at 6 years, how am I going to explain all that? That's hard. I think the way to get past that really has to be like understanding, like really taking the journey for what it is. That's what I've kind of found out of all of this is, for me, where I've derived a lot of the meaning of the journey is from all these folks I've had the opportunity to work with for so long, but also see their lives evolve as a result of this business. From seeing folks have multiple kids now, from seeing folks get married, from seeing friendships emerge and like best friendships of like many years, seeing all that and realizing that this business has been the vehicle to enable all that has at least made this very fulfilling for me, and continues to feel like making me want to protect and make this thing continue a thing to create all these dynamics outside of work, frankly, that have become really meaningful to me.
Who's the person that's had the biggest outsized impact on the way that you built the company and left things, imparted things on you that's sort of a big part of the way that you build the company? And I thought maybe I could point you to somebody to talk about, because he doesn't get a lot of airtime, which is Charles, who's been kind of your co-conspirator and other half in this company. Maybe you could talk about him and kind of what's unique about him and what he's taught you or infused into the company.
I think Charles is really the heart and soul of the business more so than I. The thing about Charles, I think, like beyond like being like preternatural, like technical talent. And I really think even today, I think people underrate him and how technically like excellent he is. Truly like a person, I think especially for engineers, they'll know is Evan Wallace over at Figma. Like that guy's an unnaturally good like engineer, like truly one of a kind. I think of Charles in a very, very similar class. I just think he's like just not as public, and his humility to such a degree almost will make it hard to ever overestimate, to overrate him. He's incredible in that end. But I think look, I've known the guy for so long. I don't know which part of it is. It's either he's not aware of how incredibly talented he is, which it could be. That's I think actually probably my understanding of Charles now is he doesn't care. He genuinely doesn't care about it's not about like how good he is. He doesn't care about what other people, how he stack ranks or compares to others. I think his great talent is actually he just wants to do great things because he enjoys doing things well. And like there's such a purity of taste and like just wanting to build something great because of nothing else, no final thing, just I want to be good at something and it means something to me. And I think that unleashes such a creativity in how he approaches problem, a fearlessness of like whether he's right or wrong, he doesn't care about it. I'm guilty of all these things. I mean, I've shared so many of like just my own insecurities and reflections of how so many of my decisions, despite me trying to rationalize and pretend as if it's something different, it's fundamentally driven by, you know, some like much deeper insecurity or perspective on myself, especially as I reflect on it. I'm sure it's happening even today. Charles, I never feel that's really been the case. Like for him, whenever he realized something, it's purely off that intellectual understanding of it. And I mean, many people at Persona often say this, like Charles has achieved a certain zen that I mean, all of us aspire towards. You know, sometimes I think people think I'm very cynical, which frankly I am. Charles, for me, gives me that hope that like at its very purest form of like, if you're able to achieve and understand it all, and like have that zen, people fundamentally are good and unbelievably kind. He makes me feel that way all the time. I mean, he's one of my best friends. We continue to talk every single day. I haven't gotten tired of the guy. I'm pretty sure he's tired of me. I'm not gonna lie, but he's too zen to act.
Exactly. That's perfect.
No, right? Like, you know, oh my gosh. And he deals with a lot from me. You know, I'm trying to contain the multitude of my emotions and just, you know, like public. But yeah, I think he never understands just unbelievably how rare he is. And I think everyone feels that way about him.
Great place to end. Thanks, Rick.